So again, we're going to talk about incorporating steel into bridge painting projects. Alvin brought up a lot of good points about how they incorporated into one contract the steel and painting process, which was basically a great point, a great way to go. Some of the things that we all know and do. Most of you know that when you're talking about bridge widening and rehabilitation projects, you're dealing with field painting, steel strengthening, jacking beams, steel repair, and seismic retrofitting, amongst other many things. I'm not an engineer, but I know these things exist out there, and I've been part of the process during bridge painting. And of course, the biggest thing is the proper phasing and sequencing of this type of work, which typically doesn't happen all the time, but it's always a good thing to strive for, right? So some of the issues that we should always be concerned about. When you're dealing with new steel components and the coating of those steel components, damage can occur during transportation, erection, and even surface preparation that's adjacent to those new steel beams that have been placed on structures when you're working with the existing bridge and the new steel that's being incorporated. And then dealing with fasteners that could include black steel, stainless steel, shot prime, or even galvanized steel that's being placed on a structure. You want to make sure when you're dealing with galvanizing that you prepare those surfaces properly and coat it properly, because galvanizing is a tricky thing to deal with. If you don't clean it just right, the coating that you apply to it, which is typically an epoxy urethane coating on top of that, which they call a duplex coating, will peel if it's not prepared properly. So you want to make sure that you're preparing those surfaces properly. Other issues, structural capacity. You want to make sure that the capacity of those structures can handle the equipment that is typically used for bridge painting with your recycling abrasives, your dust collectors, the weight of the abrasive itself, and the containment system. Some of the unanticipated conditions when you're, like micro cracking on structures that you don't see until that paint is removed from the existing coating that's been on the steel for many, many years and possibly coated several times, over coating. So you want to make sure that those are checked as well. And touching up paint is rarely equivalent to the original cleaning and painting of that structure. And those can be considered weak points, and those are the areas that could possibly fail down the road because they weren't cleaned properly, again, where those areas are from touch-up. Other areas, issues are lead-based paint. When you're removing the old steel, removing rivets or bolts, there could be lead-based paint that's exposed from those operations. And the steel repairs should be scalable to reflect, from the time of design to the time that the bridge is, under construction. Corrosion doesn't stop. So if you start designing a structure and construction phase could be 3, 4, 5 years, you want to make sure that you take that into consideration. You want to make sure that containment and other factors, issues associated with steel repair and painting may impact the project, and scheduling, again, and staging is important. And the proper phasing between steel and coating have a direct impact on the project itself. This is, to me, the most important slide of this presentation, performing an in-depth, detailed evaluation of your bridge or bridges. And not just for steel repairs or coating, but for anything you're to do. The more detail you include into your specifications, the better off and the more success you're going to have for a project. So, it's going to be more detailed than your typical biennial inspection. You may have to remove packed rust to determine the level of deterioration. And again, the scaling situation may have limited shelf life as the structure continues to deteriorate. Other special considerations, section loss. You want to make sure you address those areas before you paint the structure. You have sharp edges. Paint will flow away from edges, corners, rivet threads, and all that. So you want to make sure that you address section loss before you paint a structure. And again, as I just stated, sharp edges will create accelerated coating failure if not addressed properly. So those areas you want to stripe coat. And typically, stripe coating is done during the primer and intermediate application. Rivet removal and replacement. Typically around 25% or more, you're replacing your rivets. And if you're going to replace them before you do any coating operation, you can go with your black bolts, because then you can just abrasive blast the entire surface, including those new rivets, and then apply the coating system. If you're going to do it afterwards, you may want to think about going with galvanized bolting. And again, as it states here, lead paint may be present when you remove that old bolting, so you might have to have that removed before the general contractor starts working on those areas, because they're not used to having their contractors or employees exposed to lead-based paint. And when you're welding or burning, it creates a high level of lead fumes in the air, and it's a high concentration. It is dangerous. Treatment of a packed rust. You want to make sure you remove the packed rust prior to any surface preparation, and it can be done with chipping hammers, needle guns, etc. Many agencies use penetrating sealer and caulking in those areas, typically your beam ends, bearings, those type of areas. And you want to make sure that the manufacturer approves those sealers and caulks to work with in conjunction with their coating system. Because anytime you introduce something new to a coating system, you want to make sure they work together. If not, it could create adhesion problems and, again, accelerate failures during and after the painting process. So you always want to make sure the manufacturer provides a letter of acceptance for those additional products. Gusset plates, when you're replacing them, you want to make sure, again, you remove that localized coating system that may contain lead. When you're sandwiching plates, but to cover up or deteriorated plates, you want to make sure that they're shot primed or bare steel. And if they're galvanized, just remember, galvanizing falls under the Class A for slip coefficient or fading surfaces. So you want to make sure you know what you're using, and based on the proper requirements of slip coefficient requirements. And again, here we go talking about that slip critical connections. The Class A is 0.3, which again requires, is allowed organic zincs, galvanizing, and bare steel with mill scale. Class B allows bare steel to be abrasive blasted, inorganic zincs, thermal spray, which is typically your metallizing, and some organic zincs. And when you're dealing with liquid coatings, you want to make sure you understand the degree of cure. You want to make sure that that coating is cured, not to top coat or to touch, but is actually cured before you pull those plates together. You want to make sure that the chemical composition of the coating meets that slip critical requirement, and you want to understand the maximum average coating thickness allowed for that system to work properly and meet those conditions. Another thing to be concerned about are tack welds. You want to make sure they're cleaned properly, power tooled, smoothed out, because again, going back to the sharp edges, anywhere where you have sharp edges, you could create an issue where, again, where paint may flow away from those areas, and now you have accelerated failure or just failing of that system in those areas. Again, your weak points. NACE, the National Association of Corrosion Engineers, has developed a standard for surface preparation prior to coating application of many different types of welds. And again, if not properly cleaned, it will cause premature failure, guaranteed, of the new coating system that was applied. Any sharp edges. That's why you want to apply a stripe coat. If your specs don't require it, start thinking about it, about using stripe coats for your primer and your intermediate applications. It's literally, what I tell clients, it's literally an insurance for that system. It builds up more paint on those edges, and it gives it, again, the longer life and longer protection. Combining steel repairs and paint for a couple options that we want to discuss here. Option one, you have two separate contracts. The first contract is your steel repair. The second contract is your painting operations. Some of the pros, of having that combination of two: allow steel repairs and painting to be performed under separate contracts, allow structure to be strengthened and retrofitted prior to containment and paint equipment being placed on the structure, allows for more complete uniform finish of the coating system. It doesn't look choppy where you have finish coat looking different shades because you had to go back and do repair that system. Cons requires two contracts, more coordination for the owner. May require removal of the lead-based paint prior to steel because, again, general contractors aren't used to working around lead. They're not used to the PP requirement and all the medical requirements before you can start playing around with lead. And may not address the required repairs due to the presence of the existing coating system. Again, that existing coating system that's been on that structure for 25, 30 years. And maybe it has had a couple different applications, can cover up some issues that you won't see until you expose the steel surface. Option number two, it's one contract for both repair and painting. And typically, the cost of the painting is more than the repair, so the paint contractor is usually the prime contractor. Again, pros allow steel repair painting under one contract, also shared access between the painting and steel repair. Typically, the paint contractor will deck the entire structure, and it gives the general contractor much easier access to the bridge to do their steel repairs. Ability to strengthen the structure prior to containment and painting equipment being placed on the structure, and allows for a more complete, again, just like the first one, more complete uniform coating system application. Cons are potential conflicts between both the general contractor and the painting contractor, the required protection for the general contractor's workers while they're out there performing some of the work, and it's because of the lead-based paint that could be existing on those structures, and the general contractor not being fully aware of the PPE requirements. Third option is, again, two separate contracts, but this time doing the painting first and the repairs later. Structural inspections, the good thing about this, and I can go into the cons and pros and cons here, is if you do it this way, when you paint it first, the one great thing, I think the only excellent thing about this is after the contractor abrasive blasts the entire structure or bays or spans, the owner can go in and evaluate that area and really get a detailed idea of the quantities so there's no overruns for the repairs of the bridge after the fact. And it eliminates lead exposure to the general contractor's workforce by painting it first. Now the cons, right? You have two separate contracts, again, dealing with coordination. Will require local, after you've done the painting, now you've gone in and you're doing the repairs. So now by doing the repairs, you're damaging that newly applied coating system. So now the paint contractor is going to have to come back and adjust and repair those areas that damage occurred. So what happens? If they don't repair it properly and do the surface preparation like they did originally in the 3 coats of paint, that's where you have your potential weak points. That's where you have your possible failures that can occur on that structure much quicker than the structure should last. If it's a zinc epoxy urethane system and you're looking for 25 years, in those weak areas, like we talked about just a little bit ago with the section loss, you could lessen that down to maybe 5 years, again, because of not doing it properly. Recommendations. Again, number one, for anything, not just for what I'm talking about today, do an in-depth evaluation for your steel repairs and or coating designs. Provide really good special provisions or plan notes. The better the detailed that contract specification is, the better chance and likelihood you're going to have a successful project and you're going to have to worry about that structure for the next 25, 30 plus years. If you can abrasive blast that structure prior to priming it and have the owner come out there and doing a evaluation while that steel is exposed, that's really a great way to look at your entire structure and really get a great idea of what the needs are for the repairs. And one thing, I've talked to owners over the year, be proactive. Add contingency pay items into your specifications. So hopefully it lessens claims. You've got built-in prices that may be required for the additional repair work or anything else. So you're kind of planning ahead, right? And again, maybe that lowers your claims and maybe it lowers other issues. And as I spoke about, include stripe coating in your specifications if you haven't already, which typically will be done for primer and intermediate coats. And now I'd like to just talk a little bit about industry changes in the coatings industry. I'm sure many of you deal with bridge painting and are aware of SSPC, which is the Society of Protective Coatings, and NACE, which is the National Association of Corrosion Engineers. They have merged. They're one organization now called AMP, the Association for Material Protection and Performance. This occurred actually this year, January 1st. So before you had to go to 2 different organizations to get guides, standards, specs, training, and all that. Now they're housed under this one organization. So what does this mean to us as an industry? You have one place to go to for standards, for guidelines, for training, for contractor certification and pre-qualification. And it's just a wealth of information, and you don't have to worry about competing, in a sense where an owner may call for NACE and or SSPC now in the future going forward. And this won't happen this year or even next year, but it'll happen slowly. It's going to merge their training into one, and you'll only have to go to one place for your training and your standard and guidelines and anything else you need related to the coating industry. And again, how will this affect you? It won't affect you today, but it will affect going forward, and affect in a good way with respects to, one conference, one membership, one organization for training, one organization to go to for guidelines, standards, and all your needs, again, related to coatings. More than happy if anybody wants to contact me to discuss it. I'm on several committees. I'm also, I just found out this past week, I'm going to be the chair for the Transportation Committee for EMP, and I'll be glad to answer any questions, or you can go to emp.org, and again, there's a wealth of information there, and they'll be able to help you as well. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody, and if there are any questions, I'll be more than glad to answer them. All right, thank you.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.